Happy Sunday. I hope that you guys are having a fabulous Sunday. I'm joining you from Atlanta, Georgia. As Jessica said, my name is Joél. Joél Simone Anthony is my legal name. I'm known as the Grave Woman. I am a licensed funeral director, embalmer, life insurance agent, death care educator, and I refer to myself as a spiritual death and grief practitioner because I believe that the death, the dying, and the way that we celebrate and move through our grief is a very spiritual and sacred process that's transformative to all of us, regardless of our race, our religion, our socioeconomic background, where we come from in the world, or any of those things, how much money we have in the bank. Death is transformative, grief is transformative. Before I get into the actual meat of what we're going to discuss today and to give everyone a couple of minutes just to get in and get settled, I'd like to invite you all to participate in about a 45-second breathing exercise. I believe that, especially when talking about spiritual matters, it's important for everyone to kind of share a breath or share a space. So, if you wouldn't mind closing your eyes and putting your hands palm down on your lap, on your stomach, on your heart, on your head, wherever it feels good. Just put your hands there. Make sure your feet are flat on the floor or however you're comfortable. And what we're going to do is we're going to do a 4 by 4 by 4 breath exercise, which means that we're going to take a big 4 second breath in. We're going to hold it for 4 seconds, release for 4 seconds, and we're going to repeat that 4 times. So let's take our first deep breath in, hold it, and release. Big breath in, 2 more. Last one. Thank you guys. I hope that that felt as good to you as it did to me. It certainly helped calm me down a little bit. Um, so let's talk a little bit about the spiritual approach to grief. Um, to let you guys in on a little bit about me, I am from a place called Beaufort, South Carolina. And Beaufort, South Carolina happens to be the home of one of the main slave and trade ports in the United States of America called the Port Royal Sound. And what makes Beaufort, South Carolina so unique is that a lot of the original and ancestral spiritual practices that those who were brought here as slaves to the United States practiced in their homeland, we still practice there. Now, growing up, I grew up in a Christian church, identified as with Christianity and still identify as a Christian. However, we were taught that our ancestors that arrived in Beaufort, they were forced into Christianity by their slave owners. And as a way to survive, they incorporated their ancestral and ancient practice and spiritual practice within Christianity. And that not only carried on through religious practice, but also in the way that everyday life was lived, rituals that were performed throughout the day when a baby was born, when someone was passing away, especially after someone passed away, when the family was grieving, the preparation of the body. Those things are still practiced today in in familiar form. And what I mean by familiar form, for example, a lot of times when you go to a church service and a gospel choir is singing, you see people clapping their hands and, they may be filled with the Spirit. But we were taught that that clapping of the hands, something that simple, is an invitation for God, for Spirit, for whatever you recognize it as, to come into the environment where that's happening. So you imagine every single thing that you see done during a Christian service or a Christian funeral. It may just look like it's something as simple as clapping hands, but it has a very, very deep meaning to someone like myself who is of the Gullah and Geechee culture. And the way that that transfers over to grief and to death and dying is that many of the things that we do culturally when people pass away, I haven't seen done outside of my community back home. For example, death is a community event instead of an event where someone is just going to die by themselves. In our society, we send our loved ones off to what are they called? Nursing homes and retirement homes and villages. And they're kind of just left away from society. And in my culture, instead of that happening, the loved one is actually brought into the home, or the family becomes a part of the group that takes care of them, even if they're in a long-term facility. And I'm curious to know from you guys, what is it that you think when you hear the words spiritual death and grief? Anyone care to share? Jessica, I'll put you on the spot. What do you think about when you hear those terms?
I think of what is it again? Spiritual grief and death.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think that a lot of it is just how people, I guess, grieve. So they use a certain spirituality, whatever that may be, to help them get through the process of grieving themselves. That's something that I think of.
Okay. Anybody else care to share? I see you nodding your head, George.
People may have to unmute. Here.
We can't hear you, George.
There we go. It's, I believe, a pathway to reconcile the loss of the person and know that they're in a better place.
Joshua, I love your profile picture. Do you care to share?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry, I'm working right now, so I'm on lunch, so I do apologize for not on video. The reason why I joined was because it sounds like it's an approach to grief and the grieving process, like going through it with a spiritual aspect to it.
Okay. Now, a lot of times when we hear the words spiritual and ritual and things like that, like I think a lot of times we get wrapped up in mysticism, right? Like smoke and, I mean, I'm guilty myself, sage and, shells and Palo Santo and just all of those external material things that to us represent the mysticism of spirit, right? But the way I look at it is that spiritual grief isn't anything fancy. The thing that separates spiritual death or grief is as simple as the intention and it being a focused expression of mourning and emotion tied to any kind of loss. And it's practiced to promote reconnection and transformation. It's not just sitting in a corner and just doing all that stuff that we think of when we see what the mainstream has made spirituality all about. It's sacred. It's what's happening inside of us. And how can we be intentional about expressing our loss and our grief and our mourning? So who is spiritual grief for? And I know, Jessica, you work with a hospice organization, and I'm assuming that everyone here either works in a similar industry or Could
I
you?
think we have a variety of people because it is on the public event, right? But most people do know because they follow us on some type of social media, so they would have a relation.
Okay, so spiritual grief and the practice of spiritual grief is for anyone who's experiencing a loss of any kind. A lot of us in this past year have lost our sense of reality. The world has completely changed around us due to COVID and due to a lot of things that's been happening politically and a lot of social justice issues. So we've lost our reality of safety, our reality of the day to day. We're mourning and grieving our relationships with our friends and our families because for a long time, maybe we weren't able to spend time with them. A lot of us have lost relationships. Many of us have lost jobs. People, when they're transitioning, they're losing control of their bodies and their autonomy. And that in itself is a form of loss. People lose their sense of speech, their sense of their sense of hearing, um, social status. Many of us have become so attached to our status in society, and COVID is the great equalizer. None of that really matters anymore. Financial freedom. Maybe you were just able to pick up and travel or pick up and go out to dinner on a random Tuesday night at a really nice restaurant. We're grieving those things, but most of all, I think the type of loss that we all can relate to is the loss of a loved one. So anybody care to share what they may be grieving in particular? I know for me, for a long time, it's going to sound so silly, but I really grieved going to the movies. It was like my outlet. It was the thing that I did to disconnect from the rest of the world. And when the movie theater shut down, that was very rough for me because I didn't have that escape. So, what have you guys grieved over the past year, even if it's the loss of a loved one?
I can start. I think that grieving just socialization has been really challenging, and the change of our everyday habits that kind of kept us sane in a way. All that had to change.
It did.
I
Miss
can add in.
Oh, I'm sorry, Miss Linda.
Oh, thank you. Sorry. Visiting family at a distance, unable to do that, and certainly I miss them.
Miss Kathy, you care to share?
Do I have to do it on you?
She's sitting right next to me.
Oh,
Can you hear me?
Can you hear?
I can.
You can. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah. Visiting our relatives has been difficult. And just feeling isolated from things that you normally do.
Thank you. Amanda, I love that chandelier in the background.
Oh, thanks. Well, I've been very lucky and I've been able to keep working and interacting with people, but I'm in Puerto Rico as a military spouse and I've been not able to go visit my family, which has been tough because my mom has some health problems, so I haven't seen her in over a year. So that's probably the worst part.
Anybody else? Zell or Kathleen, Mary, anybody else care to share?
I think that my most serious problem is going to church and not being able to be with the rest of the people that would be at church. We have very minimal number of people at church, and we cannot sing out loud because they're afraid that we might project something into the air, which it's been troublesome. And then this last April 21st, I lost my best friend to COVID. He was 95 years old, so his life was not going to be long anyway, but it hit me hard.
Thank you so much for sharing, George, and I'm so sorry to hear about your friend. But I think that we can all see that there's a pattern here. We're all grieving something, right? We're all missing out on something, whether it's a person, what we do on a day-to-day basis, the things that give us comfort, being able to physically touch someone. And so that opens the question, when is spiritual grief appropriate? And the answer is simple. Spiritual grief is appropriate and safe to express anywhere at any time that you deem necessary. It can be performed or expressed whenever you are ready. It's you centric, it's your journey, your process, your rules. I try to be intentional or most intentional about expressing or practicing spiritual grief and spiritual mourning when I'm in the depths of my feelings, if that makes sense. Like when I'm the most frustrated, when I feel the most isolated. And that takes a lot of self awareness on our parts. It requires that we pay attention to our feelings. And that's what makes it spiritual. That's what makes it sacred. It's about you. A lot of times in our society, we've been taught to almost grieve for others or grieve in a way that makes others comfortable. You don't want to go to the grocery store and burst out into tears because it's going to make everybody else around you uncomfortable or question your sanity or question what's wrong with her. However, when you take a spiritual approach to grief, you're patient with yourself. I'm sorry. Somebody, okay. You're patient with yourself. You're understanding. You allow yourself to almost feel your feelings unapologetically. I'm sorry, I can never say that word. Unapologetically. You give yourself the space and the freedom to just be. And that kind of seems like a common sense concept because if, for example, Jessica called me and told me she lost a loved one, the first thing that I'm going to be concerned about is how she's doing, right? I'm not going to be thinking about, oh, you're making me uncomfortable because I don't want to hear about loss. I can't handle that. The average person, the compassionate person, the person with a heart doesn't think that way. However, because of the stigmas and the just negative connotation that we as a society put on grief and mourning and the way that we isolate those that are grieving, people feel that and they're afraid to truly express themselves. So spiritual grief is appropriate to practice anytime you feel necessary. Where do you practice spiritual grief? Again, it's you centric. You can express your grief and mourning in an intentional and focused way in your car. For example, listening to a piece of music. And even if it makes you cry, just dig into those tears, dig into that song, listen to it, allow it to just flow through you. You can practice it as you take a bath, and we'll get into developing rituals in just a few moments. But as you take your bath or shower daily, that can be, you can create that space and honor that space as a place and safe place of release. You can do it during dinner, during meals, during watching television, walking in nature, however you want to do it and wherever you want to do it is 100% appropriate. Why do we in my opinion, why should we approach grief from a spiritual perspective? And before I say this, I should have said this earlier before I started talking. I'm not a mental health professional. I can't substitute for any mental health advice or treatment that you're receiving. These are my opinions, and these are what I work with these practices are what I do with my clients, and it works for them. However, consult your physician or mental health professional. That good disclaimer. We're honestly approaching grief from a spiritual perspective because nothing else works. How can you address and express and exercise healing and true inner work from an outside perspective? I can't tell you what feels good to you. I can't tell you this water's too hot for you. I don't have your feelings, your emotions. I didn't experience your relationship and have your connection with whatever it was, your job, your relationship, your best friend, your church members. I don't have that experience. Even if we're doing those things together, my perception and my experience is going to be totally different than yours. So you can't exercise healing and true inner work from an outside perspective. And like I've been saying since started talking, our Western and Americanized society, like with all else, has approached grief from an outside and materialistic perspective. Medication has its place. However, even after the medication wears off, the grief is still there. Buying that new car has its purpose, but even after you buy that new car, that grief and those emotions are still there. I know for me, in COVID, just to be transparent, I gained like 25 to 30 pounds last year. And I realized recently that I was eating and not taking care of myself on a mental, spiritual, emotional, or physical plane because I was trying not to internalize the feelings that I was having, missing out on going to the movies, going through a breakup in a relationship changing, not being able to see my family members and hug my friends and be in social groups. So I was using something from the outside to try to numb those feelings. And the result was 25 to 30 pounds that I don't need to carry on my body. So it's not healthy to practice grief and mourning from an outside perspective. Have you all, could you give examples of ways that you've gone outside yourself to maybe try to cope with the grief that you've been experiencing this past year?
I can talk about something from the past that affected me seriously. My father died in Florida. I was not there, and I couldn't, because of my job, I couldn't travel down even afterward. I wasn't invited by his then family. He had divorced my mom, to be there for the final services. I don't even know if there were any. But the upshot was that years later, I was able to, he was a veteran, and I was able to go down there and procure a niche for his remains and find some closure. And I was amazed at the depth of my feelings that I had pushed down and refused to acknowledge for so many years because I had to focus on my own family and my own work. But having gone through that, it was a release, just touching his niche and saying goodbye. So I think if we don't do that, it stresses our bodies and our minds so badly that sometimes well, all the time, I think we need to somehow go through our own personal process to reach a plane of acceptance and peace with what's gone on.
Thank you so much for sharing, Linda. I honor your vulnerability and transparency and sharing that. And everything that you said resonated so deeply because it's what we've been taught to do. We've been taught my kids need me, my job needs me, my husband needs me, my community needs me. But we need ourselves too. And that's really what spiritual grief and spiritual mourning, and in my opinion, spirituality boil down to. It's not about a dogmatic practice or religion, which we'll get into momentarily, but it's about being intentional about reconnection with the essence of our individuality. Because someone could have that same exact experience and it causes them to go jump off a bridge or put a bullet in their head, you know? Would anyone else like to share? Anyone else feel comfortable enough to be vulnerable? So how do we practice spiritual grief and mourning and incorporate that into what already resonates with us? The number one question I'm asked is, does spiritual grief conflict with my religious beliefs, or is it sacrilegious? And the way that I often answer that question is, does your existence conflict with your spiritual belief, or your I'm sorry, not your spiritual, but your religious belief, or is your existence sacrilegious? Because like we said just a moment ago, spiritual grief, all it boils down to, if you take the spiritual and the mysticism out of it, it boils down to your relationship with yourself and your essence. And how do you incorporate spiritual grief into your current practice? Like I talked about when I got started and I was talking about the clapping the hands, I can sit here and do this for hours. But when I look at this spiritually from my cultural perspective, not anyone else's, but my cultural perspective, when I clap my hands, my intention is to invite what I believe is the Spirit of God, or the Holy Spirit, or whatever you want to refer to it as, the spirit of creation, into my space, into my dwelling. Another big part of spiritual grief and mourning is seeing and recognizing one another. And what does that mean? So when you're seeing and recognizing someone else, what you're asking yourself, and in what ways are pain, frustration, hurt, anger, regret, and other negative emotions presenting themselves? And the perfect example of this is the person that cuts you off on the highway and flicks you off and blows their horn at you on your way to work, or on your way to church, or on your way wherever you're going. A lot of us, our natural instinct is, what the heck is wrong with this guy? Like, you want to speed up and, flip the bird back off at him. But when we begin to look at the world through the lens of spiritual grief and mourning, we ask ourselves, in what ways are their emotions coming up? Is this person in pain because they recently lost a loved one? Are they hurt because they recently lost a job that they gave their all to for 20 years? Are they angry because they're going through a divorce and they don't understand why their partner would leave them, or have an affair on them, or take their kids away? And any other negative emotion that others present to us. I know I'm a big stickler for customer service. So when I go to a restaurant, or even the dollar store, and the cashier or the waitress has a nasty attitude with me, it really gets under my skin. And my natural response is to get an attitude back. However, especially now through the pandemic and everything that's happened, and then working in death care, I've learned to change my perspective to say, how are you doing today? And you would be so surprised how many people, their complete demeanor just changes. It's like you deflate a ticking time bomb balloon. It's like, my mom's sick, I'm working this job and I can't really afford to pay my bills. Like, they just open up to you because you've seen and recognized that hurt, that anger, that attitude is an expression of pain, an expression of loss, an expression of grief or mourning. And then you ask yourself, any person with a heart would say, how can I express or extend compassion and love to this individual? Maybe you leave a bigger tip. Maybe you give them the name of a podcast that would be uplifting, or you share a song with them that always makes you feel better. You start to see and recognize parts of yourself and your own pain in them, and you try to extend that joy and that love to them on a deeper level. And if nothing else, it creates good karma. It makes you feel better about the day, and it changes the interaction that they're going to have with the next customer, or the next driver, or the person with them at the next light. And even if you can't have that one-on-one conversation, just being energetically and perspectively aware of that, it has the power to change things. I don't know how, but it does. And the last part of seeing and recognizing one another is setting boundaries. I know personally, working in death care, going through the pandemic, working through that, supporting people through that, not, everything that I had going on personally, I had to enforce some serious boundaries, which is something else that we're not taught to do in this culture, especially if you're a person that cares for others. You're taught to just give it 100% and take care of yourself later. And that is the recipe for a suicide mission. And I don't use that word lightly. People who care for others are the worst at caring for us. We're the worst at caring for ourselves. You can't pour from an empty cup. You can't give from an empty vessel. So setting that boundary of today, I'm going to disconnect for at least an hour. When I wake up in the morning, I'm going to do a 4x4x4 breathing exercise. Before I respond to that email or walk into that patient's room or make that phone call or whatever it is that I have to do, I'm going to take a moment for myself to just come to one. What ways have you all learned to, if you have at all, set boundaries during this pandemic? I know one of the biggest boundaries we've all had to set is social distancing. If you're a natural person, like a natural hugger like me, you want to hug everybody you see. Or you want to just, after being in the house by myself for 3 or 4 days, I want to touch everybody I see. So what ways have you had to implement boundaries, if you don't mind sharing? Amanda, I'm going to call on you because I just love that chandelier.
Well, do you also love my treadmill behind it? So beautiful.
I love it because I need it, Amanda.
Yeah, well, I have also put on like 25 pounds, and we got the treadmill at the beginning of the pandemic, but I guess it's not quite enough. As you can see, it's folded up. So, okay, boundaries. Well, I mean, that's tough. I'm sort of at first I thought it was actually kind of easy to deal with the not being around people thing, because I'm sort of a introverted person. It's definitely gotten kind of old since then, but I work in a store right now where people come in a lot, and I think in the beginning it was we had to kind of put our foot down about the rules, always putting the sanitizer on your hands and wear a mask when you come in the stores. And a lot of people weren't willing to do that to a surprising degree. And I guess we kind of had to put our foot down with that kind of stuff. And it was a new experience, having people come in and having to argue with them about weird things like that.
That's important. I mean, and that's such a good example of a boundary, because not only is it protecting you, it's protecting everybody else in the store and their families and the families that they're going to come in contact with. So that's a great boundary. Kathleen, I saw you turn on your camera. You want to share some boundaries you've implemented or been aware of?
No, I just turned on my camera because I didn't want to be the only one. And plus, your face is so beautiful and inviting. I wanted to feel your energy.
Oh, thank you. I love your face too.
I am a total hugger and kisser. I've had a hard time, and I love my elderly people. So I'm a hospice nurse, but I also work part-time at a nursing home. Mm-hmm. And those are my family. And it was hard watching them not have the interaction that they have family. So you kind of become that surrogate daughter, granddaughter. So I'm not going to lie. I was careful. I know I've tested negative. Well, now I'm vaccinated, but I tested negative, I think 73 times since last March, because we were getting tested 3 times a week, twice a week, once a month. I went on a couple of vacations. So, I mean, I would never put them at risk, but I'm bad with boundaries. I gave a lot of hugs and kisses, but it's so sad how grateful they are for a little kiss. It breaks my heart. But no, I just wanted you to see my face.
Okay. Thank you. I love your accent. It's so cool.
Where are you from?
I was born in England, raised in South Carolina, and I've been in Atlanta, Georgia for 17 years.
Very good.
Anybody else want to share? Ms. Linda, I'm curious to know what boundaries that you had to set, because you mentioned that your job wouldn't allow you to go to your father's service. So I'm curious about what boundaries you had to set.
I was in education. I was in educational administration. So I had to stay with my job. That was the priority that was set by the district. And as far as other boundaries, I am too kind of introverted in terms of my personal life. And I find that I can go out with, and I'm always with people during the day, but at night or on the weekend, I prefer to do things with just a few people that I trust and possibly love, like my family. And so those boundaries, I choose the time that I have to show my public face, and then I can show myself with everything that involves, including my emotions and my spirituality, to my private, to the people I trust, basically. And I think we all need people we trust. And unfortunately, since I've been involved with the nursing home, there's so many people there that are just desperate for someone that they can trust enough to tell their feelings to. It's very difficult for them to open up because I don't think they've had anything like this particular information that it's okay to do it. I mean, it's as simple as that. It's okay. I'm
Okay.
probably not the right person right now. I have been in the past. I worked with children, very young children who were going through operations, and sometimes the result was not what one would hope. And so I have sat with new parents who were grieving for their children, which was a learning experience for me. But I really felt that at that point, they couldn't keep their feelings private anymore. They had to let it go. It was that, or as you said, the suicide trail. So I've experienced a lot of that, although it's not been in this particular environment.
Thank you for sharing. And I'm so glad that you said the thing about permission, because that's actually not my next point, but I'm going to go ahead and jump into it because you've opened the opportunity to segue. But we have to give ourselves permission to grieve and experience our loss and our mourning our way. Like, you have to give yourself, whether you want to call it a spiritual journey, a sacred journey, the journey to self, the journey to the moon, for all I care. You have to give yourself permission to go on that journey, experience it your way. Remember, it's you centric, it's your rules, it's your boundaries, it's your everything. You can't pick up the expectations and the comfort of others. It's about being compassionate and attentive to your needs. And so the big part of that, in my opinion, is developing ritual. And what is a ritual? We all, and many of us, I know I don't want to speak for you, but I know for me, for a long time, I was very intimidated by the word ritual, because in my mind, I saw a black hat, a woman with a stick, boiling cats. Like, that's what came to mind when I thought of ritual, even though I grew up around ritual, not realizing it was what it was. When you wake up in the morning and you make your bed and you have your coffee and you brush your teeth, those are all rituals. They're repetitious actions that you take that are intended to become so integrated in your identity that you don't even realize that you're doing it. If you're into the moon and crystals, I'm pretty sure some of you have just done some new moon rituals or preparing for full moon rituals, solstice rituals, whatever. But we want to be intentional in developing these rituals. And I always tell the story of a client that I worked with who lost her son in an automobile accident, unfortunately. And she got the news as the sun was setting on that day, right? I think she said it was like a Thursday or something. And she became dreadful of sunsets every day, because to her, especially on that day of the week, Thursday, we'll just say Thursday, it reminded her of getting that phone call and getting the worst news that she's ever received in her life. So she would go into panic attacks. She would go to bed at like 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So she didn't have to experience the sunset. She was extremely traumatized by sunsets after receiving the news of her son's passing. So after working with her through giving herself permission to face this time of day, what I had she and her husband do was to go outside on their patio or their balcony, I can't remember which one it was, and light a candle and just hold hands during that time. And over time, like I didn't work with her like on a weekly basis or anything, but like a couple months later, she told me that she had gone from dreading sunset, particularly on Thursdays, to looking forward to and not being able to wait to go outside and light that candle for her son, because it became a way for her to connect with the experience and not really accept his loss, but celebrate his life through lighting that candle. And so if we can become so indoctrinated to brush our teeth every morning, why can't we take negative experiences or undesirable experiences, especially as they relate to grief and mourning, and turn them into some type of positive ritual? Perfect example. I lost someone very important to me in 2015. My Uncle Mark, who was a funeral director, he was like my best friend. And he's the person that introduced me to death care and really encouraged me to follow through on my dreams to become a funeral director, right? And a big part of my culture is remembering your ancestors. And in order to do that and remember my uncle, my grandfather, and even the ancestors that have passed on that I've never met before, I wear faces. There are faces everywhere, like in my house, they're on my ears, ringing. My journal has faces on them. I'm really big on pictures. I want to see the faces of the people that I love. And to me, honoring or wearing these faces is a ritual that honors my loved ones. So I feel like, I'm really nervous to give this talk, but I know my uncle's with me because it feels close. What are some rituals that you all perform to comfort yourself or to just kind of get through the day? And even if you don't have any, what are some that you think may be beneficial to you, whether they be candles or baths or wearing something, a certain color that reminds you of a loved one? Anyone want to share? Or an experience? It doesn't even have to be a loved one. Mr. George, I'm curious to hear from you about a ritual that you think you can start to incorporate to honor your dear friend who passed away earlier this year. Can't hear you, hon. Can't hear you.
We're both graduates of the United States Navy, so we have a strong connection there. He served in World War II, and I served during the Vietnam era. There's about 15 years separation between our ages, but he's kind of like an elder brother to me.
Okay.
And I don't know if they'd call it a ritual, but I think about him a lot.
You think about him?
Mm-hmm.
You think about him? So just that time and meditation and reflection about him, if you're intentional about it, like let's say you say, whenever I feel like I miss him or I really want to pick up the phone and talk to him, I'm going to sit down and spend 5 to 10 minutes just really thinking about the best times that we had together, the conversations we shared, the way that we connected in a way that I can't connect with anyone else because they don't have and share those experiences that we had in the Navy. That's a ritual. It doesn't have to be anything grand. It means something to you. It's your sacred and spiritual grief experience.
Mm-hmm.
And thank you so much, both to you and he, for your service.
Thank you.
Anybody else care to share? Miss Kathy?
Oh. Mm.
No, okay, she said no. Jessica?
Well, what I do actually for my grandfather who passed a couple years ago is one of the things I do is on his birthday, and actually when I decorate my Christmas tree, so it's at least 2 times a year, I have a drink that he always drank. It's just one thing I do in honor of him. We make it special, And it's just something I do by myself for him. And it's like my little moment.
I love it. I love it. I know when my uncle passed away for his first birthday, and his birthday is actually next week. I can't believe that. But my grandma got so upset with us because we went to the cemetery and we poured half a bottle of Fireball at his grave. I mean, he was an alcoholic. He drank himself to death. I don't think anybody was not aware of that fact. So we did something he would enjoy for his birthday. We took a shot and poured the rest of the bottle on his grave. My grandma was so pissed with us. Oh my God. But I mean, he would have loved it. And he would have loved that she got pissed off about it. So job well done in my mind. So I know we're approaching, like, I can't believe this 49 minutes has gone by so fast. But here are a few rituals for those of you who may be thinking about things that you could do. Here are a few rituals that you can do for yourself, and you can get as creative with these as you want. So in more moments when you're feeling most, overwhelmed or just taken down by your grief, regardless of what it's attached to, you can simply do things like grounding through nature. You can go to a park, you can go in your yard, you can go in the parking lot, and you can just put your bare feet in the grass, in dirt, or in water. I know we can all probably relate to how refreshed we feel after we go on a picnic or spend the day at the beach. And a part of that, whether you realize it or not, is because you're participating in the ritual of grounding in and with nature. You can hug a tree. I'm a tree hugger. My hugs are not limited to humans. And I promise you, there's an energetic field that trees hold. When I hug them, it's almost like they absorb whatever is bothering me and they breathe into me whatever it is that I need in that moment. And if you're not a tree hugger and you're kind of, maybe a germaphobe, or you don't want to go as far as putting your bare feet in the dirt, the grass, the water, whatever, simply looking at nature and scenery that you find beautiful is a way to ground and connect with nature. I believe that our existence on this plane is twofold with nature. We can either contribute to her upkeep or her benefit, and in exchange, she gives back to us through our senses, whether they be sound, sight, feeling, taste, or whatever. So just simply looking at nature or eating a beautiful piece of fruit and appreciating the color, the taste, or whatever, something that came from nature, can be hugely beneficial. And it's a simple ritual that you can do whenever you feel like it. The next thing is to pay attention to your thoughts and your feelings. And when you're in those moments of missing that job, missing that relationship, missing that person, missing that connection, missing that experience or that social environment, ask yourself, what are my feelings communicating to me right now? Are they revealing a pattern or a trigger? Are they communicating the need for a boundary that needs to be established? And in response to those questions, you can ask yourself, what simple changes can I make to enhance my experience, my thoughts, and my feelings in this moment? So we talked about giving permission, which was my final point, but I just want to reiterate that you have to give yourself permission to go on this journey. And through this journey, it is my hope that by embracing a spiritual approach to grief and loss, and even death and dying, or a spiritual approach to everyday life, that we'll all be able to extend more compassion, care, and love by seeing and recognizing the grief of others, even if it's not directly tied to someone passing away. So, did anyone have any questions or want to share any final thoughts before I tell you guys about an amazing resource that I've created? I'll take that as a no. Uh-oh, come here. You did so good. You almost made it. Come on, come here. My dog, she had to make herself known, so she'll be joining me for the rest or the next few minutes. I can share my screen, right, Jessica?
Yes.
Okay, hold on one second. So I would like to just let you guys know about this resource that I created to basically help you get started in developing rituals and teach you more about ritual and encourage more of a sacred connection and sacred and spiritual death experience. And what it's called is the Grief Kit. And I'm just going to read a part of this description. Jessica's going to share the link in the chat if you're interested. But basically, I developed this kit because I believe that nature is constantly creating and blessing us with all that we could ever need. Her divine patterns and rhythms are steadily available or readily available for us to tap into and create balance in our lives, particularly during times of grief and mourning. Our experience with grief creates a gateway for us to connect with sacred and spiritual energy if we choose to approach it that way. And basically, what the Grief Kit is a collection of tools that I've learned to work with throughout my career in death care to help me remain more balanced, more open, and more in tune with my own grief experience. For a while, I felt like I should be able to do this job and not be impacted by the grief of others. And that was a total recipe for disaster. Through learning about ancient spiritual practices, tapping into some of the ancient wisdom from my own culture, and just opening myself up and giving myself permission to have a sacred and spiritual grief experience, I've become a better professional and I feel like a better person. And I wanted to share this with you guys. It includes things like sage, Palo Santo, crystals, some reading material that I strongly value that I think others will value if you're open to having a spiritual grief experience. And it can be customized for either men or women. If you're not comfortable with some of the reading materials about chakra, let's say you want a kit that's more Christian based, I offer those as well. Just let me know. But I just want to say thank you guys so much for spending the last 56 minutes listening to me talk about grief and spirituality. If you want to learn more about me, I have a pretty popular YouTube page. I'm the Grave Woman everywhere, social media, YouTube, anywhere you can think of. Just Google the Grave Woman and I'll pop up somewhere. I'd love to hear from each and every one of you about how you felt about this presentation, what I can do to make it better, what I can do to connect more with people that I may talk to in the future. And Jessica, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us. We're really, really grateful. And this is recorded so we can post this on our YouTube page. And I also second how awesome her social media is. And it is quite easy to find. So we really are grateful for you giving your time this Sunday. And thank you everyone else for attending.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you guys.